Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 119, and got Anton here from uh, good old California, and so he's feels extra early, I'm sure. And so, Anton, you want to open up our topic for the day?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Yeah, it's a little early here, 5 a.m., but it's okay. I'm only going to be on for the first part, and then I got to jump to a client call. Not client call in California, client call in Europe. But talking today about making the best first impression. And what this conversation came from. It was a post yesterday um, that I was writing and I was thinking about. And we often say we want to make the best first impression. We always want to put our best foot forward, make sure that we represent ourselves well. But the world is super stressed. The world is struggling with mental health, right? And sometimes, as much as we want to make the first impression, you know, we fail. Like we may come off as a little bit, you know, brush or just irritable, whatever it may be, or just come off as quiet because we don't have the energy to put our best foot forward and talk with, be welcoming or whatever it may be, right? And even before we get into how to make the best first impression or what are the components of it, I want to make sure that we are reminded to give people grace, is to give people a little bit of grace and realize that everybody's dealing with stuff today, as much they always happen, but I feel like we are more now than ever. And sometimes give people more than just one chance to make that first impression. Really take the time to get to know them, really take the time to see beneath that initial cover of the book that we see. But Kevin, at the same time, like, we still want to talk about tips and what it would take to make a first impression. What do people look at when they're seeing us for the first time or meeting us for the first time? And is it different from place to place? I'm curious to see from the audience, like, what you think takes to make a good first impression, right? And I'll start that with a question for you, Kevin. Like, what do you think you look for in the first impression?
Well, it's interesting. I, over the years, have talked with different people that are HR type people, and the uh, different things that people look for. Some people have a one something that they look for that determines the whole situation. I even had one that a gentleman that told me that he watched how someone entered the room and approached them, and if they kind of casually walked along and they were maybe slumped or looking unmotivated, if you will, then that was a pretty much a deal breaker. He was looking for somebody to walk in confidently, shoulders forward, at a pretty brisk pace, that kind of thing. And that was the litmus test to get through the first step. Always eye contact is important for those countries and cultures that use a handshake, a good, strong, uh, confident handshake, but not overdone, and a willingness to introduce yourself in a clear and professional way. Manner of dress, the appropriate dress for the circumstances, and um, and those are kind of the ones I look for those first 90 seconds is what the theory is behind people making a first impression. So we're told by the experts. So let me welcome Lydia and Dr. Vimla. Glad to have you guys with us today. But yeah, there are different things. Plus, and I know this is going to sound a little odd, but been around this a long time and have developed instincts or discernment about people. And again, that for me is not a deal breaker, but it's a factor that I have to consider. And I use that when I meet people as well, not just in a professional setting. So, several different aspects of first impression for me. How about you?
Um, just A lot of the similar stuff. I think I almost think there's something natural that comes from the things that you're talking about, right? It's
Hmm.
seeing that somebody's confident. It's seeing that, they making eye contact with us. They care about what we're saying. It's like it's built into us, like to assess those kind of things. Um, but a question I have for you, then the follow up from that is, do you think that extroverts have a better opportunity to make a better first impression than introverts, right? I feel like introverts are less likely to, you know, make eye contact. They're less likely to maybe approach somebody as fast. Maybe they are walking a little bit, slower through the room because they're just learning the landscape and seeing who they can engage with, whatever it may be. But I feel like, in my opinion, it is the case, and I think it's always been the case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I could see that that would be a challenge, that extroverts are going to have more natural ability, if you will. But one of the things I find with extroverts that's a downside to first impression is they come in seemingly overconfident at times, and they also come in. I think of it as almost a class clown kind of first impression. And so, yeah, it's introverts a little more challenged, but I think with either type of personality, that there are ways and tips that can help overcome those things as well. So,
And I think no matter what, as I mentioned, giving people grace, but no matter what, we want to try to control that first impression. We want to make sure that we're not having to, dig out of a hole because that we
mm,
created because we started off on the wrong foot. But just thinking about it myself, and first impression maybe 90 seconds, but first impression could be extended to the first meeting, first time we're interacting with people, right? Like I think to me is listening. I'm
yeah,
very as much as I love extroverts, or as much as I love like confident people that are more talking, I also love input based people, right? They're sitting there and they're listening and absorbing everything. Active listeners, I think people that are kind of letting us know the depth of what they're hearing versus just that they heard us. I think that too, because I'm not necessarily always like that. So a lot of times people that make good first impression on me are people that's slightly different than me in those areas. People that have different strengths than I have.
mm,
I'm always, looking to grow myself and balance myself out with teams, bosses, whatever it may be. So when I notice they have a slightly different strength, that makes me gravitate towards them. So that's something that I look for.
I want to shout out to Wendy. Glad to have you, Wendy. We missed you. It's been a while. Glad you made it. Well, and for me, uh, I don't let a first impression be the determinant. It certainly affects the approach, and a bad first impression for me will cause me to take longer to feel confident or comfortable with that person. Like you said, you may have to back up and start looking and listening for other attributes that aren't obvious. And fortunately, though, I know that not everybody makes a good first impression, so I have chosen not to allow that to be the ultimate determinant in how that person is dealt with, accepted, considered for a role or position, because I've been there. I've made the bad first impression more times than I'd like to think about, and just beat myself up over it afterwards and go, "Oh, that was so stupid." And so you're right. We need to be wise in our approach. We need to not allow first impressions to determine the outcome of the relationship. That I think is a key takeaway from the conversation from a standpoint of being the one uh, observing the first impression anyway.
It's interesting. I think we've even talked about this concept before, but I almost, whenever I meet somebody for the first time, act maybe not professionally. I think that's more on a personal level, but when I meet somebody for the first time on a personal level, I almost act a little bit worse than myself, or a
Mm,
little bit more coarse, a little bit more like tougher out of shell, and like as a defense mechanism, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I think it's what it is. I think that's where it comes from. Um, so like it's curious for people to think about it. Like think about how you are in the beginning. Are you trying to be the better than you normally are? Are you trying
Mm-hmm.
to be, maybe a little worse than you normally are, tougher than you normally are, or are you really the same? And the question that comes to me, like just to ponder, is do I want to, like, do I care? Right? Do I care to try to be my best self with that first impression and maybe set myself up for failure later almost? Do I care to bring my natural, authentic self forward? Because to me, like, I almost want to be that more. Because then, if I made that first impression, I built a relationship, I did all these things, but it's based on something that I'm not really, it's not really who I am. Does that really serve me? And is that different professionally versus personally? And in my mind, yeah, I think sometimes professionally we have to make the best first impression. Sometimes we have to be, better than we are, so people give us a chance, give us a deal, give us work with us, hire us, whatever it may be. But personally, I definitely think that sometimes, even if it's not a great first impression, but we really are who we are, and they didn't like us, oh well, tough stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that you're hitting on is knowing ourselves. A lot of people, you and I have been doing this a long time, and so understanding ourselves and digging deeper is just what we do. But there are people that are out there that still don't really know themselves. They're kind of flying blindly in terms of themselves. So the idea of, am I making my best first impression of who I really am? They're not even sure who they really are. And so, one of the first steps to be able to make a good first impression is, who are you? And what does that look like? What is that authentically? In terms of trapping, as far as clothing and different things appropriate to settings, those change and adjust, but even between professional and personal, even the job type. And so that's not being inauthentic, that is adjusting appropriately to your circumstances. And so, again, though, in terms of being authentic, I agree with you. I don't want them to hire me based on something that I may not be true to who I am. It's not fair to me, not fair to them. And so, really, really putting forward the best, not the best first impression of sorts, but the best of who we are. And I think that's a key piece. If we put the best us forward, we're likely to be more confident. We're going to have a different demeanor. And by doing so, I think that will be the ideal situation. Do we always get the ideal situation? Not necessarily, but I think that's should be our target. Be who we are in the best form that we can, presenting ourselves appropriate to the setting. And this is going to sound almost silly, but on a personal level, if uh, get invited to get together with a group of friends and everybody's going to the beach, well, uh, you show up in a suit to go to the beach, that's going to be kind of out of place. That may be, what we do most of the time is wear a suit, but the end of the day, showing up that way in that setting would be kind of, again, the first impression, or even at that point, a second or third impression, not going to be real favorable, or certainly cause people to question. So adjusting appropriately to the circumstances isn't inauthentic, but just a wise way to approach it. But again, do it as who we are. So, and it goes back to, who are you? Do you know? and therefore understand what the best you even has the potential to look like. Uh,
I love your focus on knowing who you are, to make that first impression. No matter what, the first impression is limited. Like, you don't have all the time in the world, whether it be the first 90 seconds, whether it be the first conversation. Choosing what parts of ourselves we show is really important. Also choosing what parts of ourselves we feel safe putting out there.
mhm,
So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with, picking and choosing and doing it that way. So I'm curious for the audience. I'd love for you guys to type in the chat and mention what kind of things you look for in first impressions, whether it be trying to do it yourself, where you're setting a first impression, or you're assessing somebody or meeting somebody for the first time, what kind of things you're, looking for from them. Um, I'm trying to think like what kind of advice can we give people like to get better at it? Like even if they struggle, like if say you're an introvert, right? And we said extroverts may have a little bit more um, advantage naturally, but it could be learned behavior, right? So maybe it's
mhm.
not something that's natural, but it's learned behavior. You mentioned handshake. What's your belief on the handshake? Is it firm? Is it kind of medium? Like how do you do it yourself?
To me, I judge a handshake by the person that I'm engaging. I try to match their level of firmness to a point because I've gone to shake people's hands before, and it's like somebody handing me a dead fish.
Oh
And
yeah.
I pull my hand back and kind of want to wipe it on my shirt. but uh, but again, if you walk up and you're going to shake hands with a lady, you're obviously not going to use the your full strength grip with somebody like that. But you walk up a guy, big burly guy, and you're going to shake hands, you're probably going to need to give it your full strength on it. So again, be reciprocal to who you're shaking hands with. And one of the key things, though, and this is a real challenge, for me, I tend to look down where their hand is rather than looking at them. And I've learned, we'll figure out how to make the connection on the handshake, but keep the eye contact as part of that process. And just the other one, sometimes you shake hands with people and they want to, you'll connect for about a second and a half and then release. Other people want to shake their hand and almost like they're going to jack the car up, that dum, 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 dum. And so again, being aware of who you're meeting and how they're responding, and be reciprocal. Again, I don't have strong feelings that I gotta, if they don't shake my hand 3 times, pump 3 times or whatever, that it's not successful. I think it's more appropriate to the person involved and being aware of that. And
The one that gets me, Kev, when people shake hands, it is this thing that people have learned, a while back in a more dominant, male dominant world. But taking the palm and rotating it down, right? So like if I'm coming in, this is my hand and
mhm.
this is their hand, to almost do this to show like sign of dominance, things like that. I still see people doing that. I'm curious. Have you observed that?
Yeah, there are people, and that's an interesting thought that'll come in, and you can tell they're trying to be what I call one-upsmen. They're going to establish that they're in control and so on. And for me, doesn't impress me. For me, in fact, if anything, I'm going to go, well, let's see here. I'm not sure we're getting the roles correct here. And it's not that there has to be a dominant person, but if you start telling me you're going to dominate me, I'm going, no. And again, not verbally, but with the action. And you're right. A handshake can communicate just that I'm going to be in control, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't do anything for me. I think it's an unwise approach. I think the idea is to establish mutual respect, and a handshake is a good way to start that communication non verbally.
You know who impresses me? Like I feel like huggers, people that are comfortable hugging, like even if it's, a fairly new relationship. Usually it's not first impression. It may be first impression in person. So like I'm thinking a specific person recently I met in person for the first time. And we've chatted a few times on video. So like there's some foundation of relationship. But it looks like he just hugs everybody anyway, so may not be even that way. I'm impressed by those people that have the confidence or maybe the care to come in and give a hug. What are your thoughts on hugs?
Oh, I think it's a way to make a connection. Now, it can be done inappropriately, obviously, but uh, for a long time, I was not real keen on man hugging man, but I've come to appreciate the connection you make there, and the I think an expression of openness and a willingness to connect beyond the news and weather. And I think it's valuable. Now, it was interesting having traveled to India in a different culture to consider how the culture views that. Okay, and also having been exposed to other cultures, such as for me the Asian culture, Korea and China, some of those, and so being mindful of the cultural implications is important because and that's not about making the impression per se, but just make doing the right thing appropriate to that person's culture to not create an uncomfortable situation. It's one thing to create a good or a bad first impression. It's another entirely different thing to create an awkward or uncomfortable situation. And those happen if you're not aware or whatever. But I think that personally, hugs are, I think, a great way to communicate. And if you look throughout history, those types of interactions, hugs, and even the and cultures using even the side of the face kind of a kiss thing. Those are considered a normal way to introduce and to make that initial connection. So yeah, I have become very comfortable being able to do a hug type of hug with either men or women because it is an outpouring of the way I am as a person.
That's awesome. No, I'm not natural with it for anybody. Like, and I also do like the butt out hug a lot of times where like I'm leaning forward, my butt's all the way back.
I'm gonna get close, but not close.
But I'm working on it. I'm trying to get better with it. I mean, like I come from a culture that's very warm once you get to know us, right? Like
Right.
Slavic cultures, like very personable, but initially it's not like warm and fuzzy in the beginning, right? So it's a new thing for me. I've been working on it for a long time, but yeah, I'm very impressed when people do it, and especially when they're genuine and like those people that actually give you like I try to kind of give them a soft hug, and they're like, "Come here, bring it
Yeah.
in." I'm like, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
that's that's that's
That's,
awesome. I love that."
that's like the handshake. Those that want to come in with the soft touch kind of go okay, but then uh, somebody says, "Oh no, that's not working," and they pull you into a real contact, and then so yeah, I've been there, and
Yeah.
it can be a little uncomfortable in certain situations, but I think a lot of people appreciate that openness and the willingness to truly connect rather than just being a very surface process. So, welcome, MD. Glad to have you with us.
But hey, I gotta jump. I gotta get ready for this call. But
All right,
um,
we'll
thanks
keep it
thanks for
rolling as
thanks
long
for
as the audience.
chatting, and thanks for everybody with the audience. I will catch you guys next week. Thanks, guys.
See ya.